Welcome to Crypto Radio. We interview the top thinkers and entrepreneurs in the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry. We also cover topics like trading, investing, and ICOs. We're your hosts, Mike Gilliland, Michael Pohl, Chris Sparks, and Yuvi Ivanova. We're entrepreneurs, crypto investors, and co-founders of a new blockchain investment platform called CoSyndicate.io. We created CoSyndicate and Crypto Radio to make crypto investing a better experience for you. If you're new to the show and you'd like a list of our top episodes and resources, go to cryptoradio.io/start. If you like our podcast, you can subscribe, share, and follow us on social media and leave us a rating and review on iTunes and elsewhere. It helps others find the show and we really appreciate it. You can find all those links at cryptoradio.io/start.
Hi, and welcome to Crypto Radio. My name is Chris Sparks. In this episode, Yuvi, Mike, and I welcome Dean Masley and Nathalie Drost, the co-founders of NestEgg. NestEgg explores the use of blockchain to empower individuals to make better investment decisions within their pensions. Much of what they do involves co-ownership and using blockchain technology to make certain investments more accessible to average people, which would otherwise be unavailable. We cover a lot in this episode, including what decentralization means for our daily lives, the limits of blockchain in managing big data, what automation will bring in the future, and how the economy can be more inclusive. Although NestEgg is a relatively new project in the blockchain space, the experiments they are running promise interesting models for how to invest in and own your future in an entirely new way. Enjoy the conversation, and for the show notes and links mentioned in this episode, don't forget to go to cryptoradio.io/NestEgg.
All right, guys, welcome to the show. Dean, you're one of the founders of NestEgg. We watched you speak. We've seen you at a bunch of conferences all over Europe. And I've really been fascinated by your ideas when it comes to the blockchain. You're obviously a bit younger in this space. And I like the connections that you've talked about and sort of the community and your perspective in this space. We invited you onto this show, and you've got Nathalie obviously with you. So before we get started, why don't you guys just give us a quick introduction to who you are and what NestEgg is all about?
So my name is Nathalie. I'm co-founder of NestEgg together with Dean and then another guy. I graduated Master of Business Administration, but during my master's, I wrote my master thesis about hybrid banking. It's kind of what does the future of banking look like? And I came up with a solution that was decoupled from the euro, paying with services. And then, of course, that relates to blockchain. So I made the systematic conditions for building it on blockchain. Then I met Dean on Bitcoin Wednesday in Amsterdam. He was a speaker there and I was co-hosting it. And after that, he introduced me to the Blockchain Education Network. I then set up together with Dean the Dutch chapter. We enrolled for a hackathon and we won the hackathon, and that was with NestEgg. So that's the idea we're working on now.
Yeah, and I'm Dean Masley. I'm the American. So I was the last executive director of the Blockchain Education Network. I've always been really interested in like grassroots blockchain efforts. I was also part of a startup called Unsung. So I've always been very into entrepreneurial efforts. I've been really fascinated by using blockchain to solve problems because it's such a new technology and offers so much potential. And there's not many people who are, well, now there's more people using it, but it's still something that there's a lot of opportunity for cool stories and cool successes because it's still so untested ground. So it's a blue ocean of opportunity, and it's cool to be able to build these new infrastructures with this technology. So NestEgg is helping individuals invest in the future of innovative infrastructure. And the incentive is that in doing so, you guarantee yourself ownership of the productive capacity, meaning you can reduce your cost of living by owning pieces of infrastructure that provide for your everyday needs. So for example, if you want to supply your home with energy with some kilowatt hours, you purchase some ownership in different windmills. Let's say you purchase 1% in one windmill here, 1% there. Every time that windmill spins, you get 1% of the energy generated from that spin. Doesn't matter what the price of that energy is because you own a percentage of that windmill. So you own a percentage of its capacity. No matter the fluctuation of market prices or government volatility, you own that 1%. So your house will always receive that 1% of the windmill, whatever it generates. Same thing, then you can apply it for self-driving cars and transport around town, or real estate and the ability to like maybe have like a decentralized Airbnb. That's not very well scoped out. But the idea is that there's a lot of things that we need to build for the third industrial revolution to make sure that we can completely transform the way we consume energy, we transport ourselves around and communicate with each other. To build the infrastructure that supplies all that needs a lot of different people contributing small amounts. And the incentive to do so is that they will own pieces of that infrastructure once it's built. And in doing so, they secure their future life security because these infrastructures will provide all their daily needs. And then they locked in a price at a much earlier date. So as dollar keeps inflating or the euro keeps inflating, they'll have locked in their price, for example, of that windmill. So they'll keep that green energy price what they did years before.
Very cool. Very cool. So what's the status of this project right now?
It's a high ambition because the technology we pretty much have figured out. But the thing is, you also need the legal environment to accept that you pay out in kilowatt hours and not in euros. So there's a lot of obstacles to overcome in that sense. But to prepare for that, we're starting small experiments in which we test the customer feedback. So to build a product that's best for the customer, to see how they interact with other owners. So how do people go about sharing ownership? How do we distribute the value? How do we make this as customer friendly as possible? And while doing that, in the meantime, we're figuring out where can we actually put this live, under what circumstances, and what's going to be the projects that we're investing in by then. So currently, our biggest project coming up is solar panels. We're trying to put it on the roof of Brightlands, the campus we work on in Limburg, and have the community invest in that because it shows the effort of something that's really in a proposition. And it's still in kind of a safe base where we don't have to have every legal aspect figured out to be able to do so. So it's really working to the proposition while along the way figuring out all the tiny steps or big steps.
Very cool. What kind of partnerships do you guys have in place right now?
So right now we've been talking with a few companies. We've been talking with, for example, energy providers. So companies that deliver energy from the grid. That would be really important for us if we're doing, kilowatt hour credits so that you can have kilowatt hours delivered to your house. We need relationships with the grid. We've been talking with mobility companies. So there's companies in Haarlem that do, you can rent Teslas, for example. There's also, as I said before earlier, Mobotic. We're not partnering with them right away, but we're interested, for example, in their proposition of deploying self-driving cars in communities that are crowdfunded by the individuals.
Yeah, and our main partner who helps us in developing our proposition is a pension service provider in the Netherlands. They serve 4.5 million customers. So they have the financial institutional knowledge of how it's currently being done. So we get a lot of help from them in the legal environment, in the portfolio manager, asset managers, like those people help us in that partnership.
That's a good point. So to clarify, we actually started this about a year ago at a hackathon. Working in the future of pensions track, where we proposed, the seed of this idea, and then APG hired us on to continue building this as an experiment and then plan for scale out, which means become our own company.
Cool. So what excites you most about this space?
So for me, I'm really excited just seeing so many people, especially young people, feeling the confidence and the authority to attack problems that seem so much larger than themselves. It's really cool to see the use of community dynamics to basically inspire a larger group of people than yourself, and using these kind of open source platforms to get their ideas, their thoughts, their governance into your platform so that your idea can actually grow into incorporating all this kind of local input in the way that people are going to use it in their everyday lives. And I think this is much different than the traditional way of doing things, in which you have to build a huge hierarchy, build the entire stack yourself, be a boss who can control things in every last detail. And I think there's an interesting shift in strategy that kind of leverages the way the internet distributes information, and people can tap into that by building platforms that are achieving problems much bigger than themselves by giving the tools to people who need it most, whether that's in America or in Africa. Being able to do these value transfer programmably over the internet has offered some really, really cool opportunities.
Yeah. How long have you guys actually been in this space for?
I think a little over 2 years for me.
Yeah, and I've been around since 2013.
So you've been in long enough to see the evolution of it already. Did you notice at the beginning it was kind of like anarchistic, a lot more independent, a lot more programmers, and now when you go to events and conferences, it's a lot more banker, investor focused?
Absolutely. I still remember buying some honey off some dude on Reddit back in 2013. I did some graphic design work, so I had some Bitcoin. I didn't know where to spend it. And some dude on Reddit was selling honey from his bee farm. And I ended up having it shipped to my house. And I thought this was the coolest thing, that I used this alternative money to actually buy a real world thing.
Let me guess, it cost you like 30 Bitcoin?
Luckily, Bitcoin is around like $100 at the time. So no, well, luckily it wasn't that dramatic. But I still remember the feeling it was so cool to have this financial transaction done without any actual currency, but using this kind of like social experiment of a technology. And to see where it's come now today from that is really spectacular.
But it's really interesting you mentioned, because when I went to the first conference, it was really people in t-shirts like promoting their system or their use case. And I just yesterday came back from crypto assets conference in Frankfurt, and then it was like pretty much all suits. So it's really shifting towards the financial institutional industry who don't really know what to do with it, really go to conference anymore. I feel they just work on the use case and what they believe in.
So being that you've been in the space for a while, but you're on the younger side of the people involved in this space now, what do you notice about the evolution of this space? And what do you notice about the differences in mentality between older generations and younger generations?
what I feel is that the younger generation is a bit earlier in understanding that it's not so much only about technology. Like, we know it works and there's stuff to overcome, but we just build with it and we want to try use cases. Whereas I really see the older generation trying to make the link with the current system and really like, what's technology about? How can we make standards for it? How can we discover what's all in it? So it's really the difference of let's just go with it or let's find out how it affects us. And that I really noticed being younger.
I remember when we first met you, you were talking about the groups that you were in and the communities and how young people were getting involved. I remember how excited you were when you were describing the communities and the mentality in the space. So that's really why I asked that question.
Oh, yeah. So in that context, it's really cool to see like all these different groups of people being able to connect with each other, because you can have a local initiative in which I always call this bottom-up globalization, where like you have local first initiatives, which really address the problems in your community. You use all the things that are available to you in your community. In the Netherlands, you have really awesome payment rails like Ideal. You can literally pay someone with this fee-less transaction. That's different than America, for example, where I pay my rent with a paper check that I actually would physically deliver to my landlord. And so different communities have different obstacles and challenges that they have that they can use this technology to address those very uniquely. Yet, in using this technology that's global, whenever they solve these problems locally with this global technology, they create this interconnected hub which brings them all together and able to cross into different cities, use the currency natively, use solutions they built in their hometown, and it works in those other hometowns. And in doing so, you create this kind of this global community of people working on local problems that affects everyone globally. I like that model a lot better than like a top-down approach, like big institutions trying to implement big hierarchy or overarching details locally in a community, like how your soap, what chemicals are inside of them. Not that that's a bad idea, but just as an alternative of handling things local and going up versus top down.
Do you think that's how you guys are approaching things with NestEgg?
It's hard to say. I mean, so it's easier to obviously make that argument with the Blockchain Education Network, where we're actually sending out kids in different university campuses. There's some bottlenecks with building infrastructure where we do need some bit of work with people who are already in the field who are building windmills or solar panels or self-driving cars. But I would still say there's definitely the element of bottom-up building in terms of like, we don't aim to supply every windmill on the earth, or NestEgg doesn't plan to supply every self-driving car on the earth. Unlike Uber, which plans to do that exact thing. Like, we plan to work with all the self-driving car companies, or like, for example, Mobotic, which is launching in Paris, and they want to do a test trial in Heerlen, which is a self-driving car blockchain platform. We want to work with those people to help them scale out their infrastructure plans and not try to do this alone. So yeah.
So Dean, I just was wondering, actually, have you noticed any difference in sort of the way that people talk about blockchain in the US versus in the Netherlands or the EU at large?
Ooh, very interesting. Well, my own experience was that, as I said before with my example, the payment rail, in America, like, Bitcoin for me was actually fun to use as like a real way to transfer money, because like it was either like, Venmo, PayPal, or then I was pushing Bitcoin. But like in America, you can't very easily transfer money from bank account to bank account. I was actually most often pitching it in America as like an easy way to send money around. But here in the Netherlands, that's really not the case. I don't know, Natalie, how would you describe your fascination with blockchain here?
Well, I've noticed that the second time I met Dean was in London at the conference, and we spent 12 other kids and we shared an Airbnb house. And normally I was just used to like sending ideal payments to cover it, but now there were Americans in it as well. And then Bitcoin was a really good use case, because otherwise there was just no good real way of doing so. But indeed, for me, Bitcoin had more of the idealistic values than really the being so fast as a payment thing, because indeed ideal is almost just as fast. It doesn't cost any transaction fees, or at least not that you see. So for me, it was really more the idealistic of what you could do with it than for Dean more of like, oh, this is really cool. This really works.
It's like the entrepreneurial ability.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of the technology.
So I guess I'm also interested in hearing sort of the less tangible kind of feeling that you get from the community in the US versus the one in Europe. Do people talk about it in sort of like an existential sort of dreamy way, like in one place and not in the other? What's sort of like the vibe of the community in one context and the other?
Well, it's hard for me to say. I built myself quite a bubble in terms of like, I surround myself with crazy blockchain people. So the people I talk to are very visionary and like to talk about scoping out how they're going to change the world. I don't want to say if that's reflective of the entire United States or of different demographics, but I would say from the people I met at MIT or from Berkeley, for example, whenever we talk crypto, it is very visionary. I don't know if that's the right word, but yes, for the most ideals of this technology. In Europe, you definitely find people who are doing the same too, but I would think there's also a bigger stress on applying it right now in existing infrastructures, maybe a little more down to earth. But at that point, I'm hesitating while I say that because I don't want to make too many generalizations.
No, I think that's pretty accurate. When I came into the space and I wanted to do something more with it, someone told me go to America because shit happens there. And then and then afterwards I realized that there is a lot of happening in blockchain space in the US, but since everyone can just plug into it, right? It pretty much happens in China as much as it does in America. But without generalizing, I do like to say indeed that we might be a bit more pragmatic here. And when traveling in America, I noticed more of the anarchy way.
More
towards,
the moonshots.
Yes.
Going for the biggest idea and no one can get in their way.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you fail, you'll get up and try again.
And shit definitely does happen in the US.
Yes.
Not necessarily in a good way, but yeah.
Do you think that they're going to get a reality check with those moonshots pretty soon?
My personal opinion, I don't necessarily think that moonshots are the worst idea. I think a lot of projects, like there's going to be a lot of failures, but also I think the most successful ones are going to be considered moonshots historically. Like if you were to like say, I think future successful platforms like Augur, for example, I'm pretty bullish about. I think that platform, when it was communicated a while back, did have to go through its fair share of fighting against the grain. And in doing so, I think they've defended their moonshot quite well. So I don't particularly see the moonshot thing dying down, but personally, that to me isn't necessarily the worst thing. I think it's okay if you have a lot of failures. People get up and try again later. It's a matter of attempting these big things.
But I think in terms of reality check, we should, or the people in the industry should guard for what they want. Because when you looked at the internet, they also said it's going to give everyone access and it's going to help the poor and all those things. And now again, right, with blockchain, they say like the half of the world doesn't own a bank account. With blockchain, you just need the internet and you can access Bitcoin. And it's true, but like if you can access Bitcoin, you still don't have $10 for a transaction fee to spend, right? So I think in terms of reality check, we should guard for who we actually built this for. And if we say it's going to bring inclusivity, then let's really evaluate how to do that. So in that sense, yeah.
So what sort of safeguards does blockchain have against centralization of power in blockchain? Where in the internet case, they've kind of centralized. Google and Facebook have done a really good job of centralizing the internet for them.
Well, I think from the get-go, like for example, even when we're building NestEgg, there's other companies that are working on trying to build, how do you fractionalize the ownership in different productive infrastructures? I mean, especially in the energy sector alone, there's plenty. There's like, WePower, Grid Plus, ZWatt. So like the cool thing is that all these companies release all their plans upfront in the open to the public, like their full business strategy. And then if they have any code, anything that's already built is out there in the open. And also a strong priority on getting a community involved and having them impact the business decisions of the platform. I think that's the beginning of countering that.
But also safeguards. I remember coming into this industry and I talked with someone who was already in it for longer. And I asked, so what if whatever government just says you cannot use Bitcoin, otherwise we put you in jail? Isn't that the end of Bitcoin? Because it's like one of the first questions that came to my mind. And then what he said, I always remember afterwards. It's like, yes, they could do that, but then there will be another coin which is so fast and so much more anonymous that it just would go on with that one. That I think made me realize for the first time, like, shit, it's really decentralized. And decentralized meaning in a sense that you don't need safeguards because you just need your mobile phone or your internet connection. And with Zcash coming up and likely more coins in the future, there's no way for centralized party to take that share.
I think culture plays a big role in this too. Like all of us in the space now appreciate the transparency and decentralization, but I wonder if the general public is going to care as this adoption increases. So it's like I could see different companies that are quite a lot more centralized and controlling, just building some sort of equivalent application on the blockchain, but still maintaining a degree of control. So it really depends on how the culture evolves with the technology. Like, are we going to still value these things as highly as we do today?
I think that's a very good point because we work in the pension industry and it's kind of the same that people are not involved with their pensions. And then part of the problem is that there's no transparency. But then they realize that if you provide transparency, people don't care. And I think that's a very good point you make is that we honestly believe in it. But I hope this time it's different because the tool is so natively transparent, not like putting on top of it, but it's already is, that this time it does make a change and that people trust it. But definitely that needs to show over time.
I think your earlier point about bottom-up entrepreneurship and innovation is a really important thing, especially as the tools and the funding become more accessible all over the world. It's going to be interesting to see what people create and how little of the value and the platform they're trying to capture for themselves and how much they're just willing to give to the general public.
I think that's a great way of putting it. It's like all this information and all this valuable things. Like, for example, when a platform like a self-driving car is doing their transactions on the blockchain, that means every ride, every dividend, who's getting what, all that economic activity is live and everyone can view it. Like, for example, when I used to work at Gore, we paid an ungodly amount of sum of money for Accenture to run these huge market trials to try and get information from the consumers about what they thought about which jackets to like to buy and et cetera. And the thing is, it's like, because that information is private, only experts like a big company like Gore can afford for the market research to make action on those researches. Everyone else then just follows Gore. So that model, for example, only works when the data is hidden, because then you can actually have capture for doing so. So having this information publicly and then out in the open definitely makes it easier for more entrepreneurs to use it for building new apps or what have you.
I love the idea of information and processing power being also one of the things that are distributed on the blockchain, because then we have a situation like what Jeremy Rifkin wrote about in Zero Marginal Cost Society, where the competition of these different platforms is causing the cost of using those platforms to plummet. So it's like the only platforms and applications that are going to be able to be competitive are ones that are truly decentralized, where the information is free, the access is next to nothing, or like the minimal possible transaction. And if there is a middleman attempting to capture some of that percentage of value for himself, then he's going to be outcompeted by some kid who's using the same data set to create an application, but not taking a percentage of any of the transactions. So it's like, you just simply won't be able to compete on margin anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really cool thing.
Because if you have to build your own PayPal servers to run all the things the blockchain normally does, or you can implement an API and the blockchain does it for you, one requires a lot of money to get started and the other doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned the data being publicly available in the blockchain. What kind of applications do you see for big data in blockchain?
Well, I think just on a more high overview basis, it's just having more access to information lets you find efficiencies better. Like if more people are looking at massive streams of data and more people are running analysis on those things, it's more likely people are going to find areas where things are being done inefficiently, where maybe costs could be reduced and things are, maybe taking too many steps or being sent to the wrong parties, or they could be aggregated. Just in general, having that much more eyes on that much more data is bound to produce efficiencies in the way we produce things and transfer things.
I do like to play the devil's advocate here, because data and blockchain don't necessarily go together that well, in the sense that it's decentralized, and putting more data it makes it more slow, makes it not that scalable. So I think it's good for some use cases, but when you look at big data, I doubt it. It really depends on what you're trying to prove. So it offers more transparency, but only to very specific things, in my opinion.
Can you elaborate on that a bit more? Like, what kind of use cases is it useful for in terms of data on the blockchain?
I would say any transfer of value, and that doesn't necessarily need to be monetary. It could also be non-monetary or infrastructure or any kind of service. And that transfer of value actually just relates to ownership, and whether it's money or just numbers, that in case of blockchain, I think that's really important. So you will see that in any industry. You will see it for land ownership rights. You will see it for who owes somebody what money, all those cases. But when looking at data, like what the ownership actually entails or under what circumstances or whatever, I think that will be never something that's on chain, and also not really needed, because if the ownership is registered, that's the thing that's mainly important.
Yeah, I think scalability is also a huge elephant in the room for all these discussions about the use of big data and blockchain, because, as Zara makes a good point. And even my argument of having economic data being available to everyone isn't possible if it's not scalable enough to actually accommodate all that data.
Well, you have ways around it, right? Like you can store the result, for example, and then you can see the calculation elsewhere. Like there's already alternatives for it. And I also believe that we're going to see solutions for scalability in the future very soon. But the thing is that centralized is obviously more efficient than decentralized. It's just what are the benefits you're trying to achieve? Because I always try to say, how efficient is it if I want to send 50 cents to Dean and the whole neighborhood needs to check my transaction? But it does offer so many other advantages. But if people say we need to scale blockchains, like, wait a second, you got to set your priorities straight and realize that maybe it's not scalable, but it offers advantages that you otherwise wouldn't have had, because that's the whole point why we're going decentralized.
So moving away from efficiencies and scaling, you guys definitely have like a intimate connection with your customer in the actual use of your platform. What role have you noticed user experience and design playing actually in your project?
Well, actually, so we had one kind of rough draft of an experiment where we had people share a drone. Basically, so the idea is that before we start doing windmills and solar panels, which costs quite a bit of money, a windmill is like 2.2 million euros. Let's start with something a little bit smaller and see if we can get people to locally share something like a big drone, or coming up actually in this next month, we want to have people share access to a virtual reality Vive. So we're going to be testing these concepts of like, is it possible to find the right amount of people who are enthusiastic about a thing, make sure they have perfectly matching schedules that are automatically organized by the system so that each of them can pay just the amount that they're using. And in doing so, they can pay the reduced price for the access that they would normally have wanted anyways. So we'll be setting up those experiments. We did the one with the drone. From our experience there. The actual user experience we needed to work on incredibly. We really just threw it up there with like using a few smart contracts. We used a few databases to organize the incoming data, but like the biggest complaint was user experience. But that makes sense because we actually had people going on through my Ether wallet, adjusting the smart contract and such. So that was pretty obvious.
Yeah, obviously you love your own product, so you expect customers to love it the same. But we realized we really built super customer unfriendly. We found that customers, if they cannot find it out in 30 seconds, they pretty much skip it. And we had them sign up with my Ether wallet and actually buy Ether. And when it's someone's first interaction with blockchain, which is already a mindset, right? It was just a way.
Like imagine us, we had to write like Medium articles of like how to go into Lightbit, how to give your information away so you can pay with the bank account. It's easy stuff when you know it, but then when you realize you're trying to explain for the first time to someone to access your platform, we realize that gateways are super important to let people with euros have access to these like Ethereum dApps, even before the public has Ethereum. So that was a pretty crucial realization that even though all the benefits come from it being on Ethereum, we need a gateway to make sure people with euros have access to it.
Yeah, it's like asking someone to send you an email when they've never used a computer before.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good analysis. Yeah, so we definitely learned from it.
So right now, the scope for the next experiment is like, how can we accommodate that by adding gateways so that we can easily let people use euros, and we'll handle all the messy stuff to make sure that you get the same experience that we're promising everyone else.
So without divulging too much IP, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what the gateway would look like?
I mean, so it's two functions. One, for example, is for us to do a lot of the stuff on our back end, like bulking transactions, aggregating users' funds, and making like one single transaction on behalf of a bunch of users. And then, of course, then it's just like Coinbase. In Coinbase, it's not like you have an address and that address holds the Bitcoin the whole time. Like Coinbase will move money around. So you might be able to receive money from an address, but like your money is not just held on that one address. It's held on an off-chain database entry of your actual user balance. So the actual transfer of value that are important in and out of the system is on blockchain. But then once you're within Coinbase, if you send it between Coinbase users, for example, that's all off-chain for free. So we think that's an interesting model, and we're looking into that. So for our experiment, we're going to be bulking transactions together. So people who use euros will be able to aggregate all their things and initiate one single transaction to the crowd fund, for example. And in doing so, we trigger all the all the transparent audit trail of one transfer of ownership and transfer of funds. Yet on our system, the users will have fee-less transfers between each other, and the dividends and all that stuff will be handled on our server. Another way is to also accommodate, especially as we scale beyond different jurisdictions, is simply adding gateways to our platform. So I mean, like Lightbit, Bitonic, BTC Direct, those are companies that let people in the Netherlands, for example, transfer euros for Ether, like back and forth. So if we attach those on different ends of the ecosystem and we use a stable coin in between, that could also allow us to make sure that users have euros that they can convert at the end or the edge of the ecosystem. And then wallets in the system, we can use a stable coin to make sure that wallets running through the blockchain, giving it that transparency and auditability, the value is held relatively constant so that when it comes out the other end, be able to be transferred for the right amount of euros.
Yeah,
that's still a lot to be discovered, and we're still working on it.
I think what Dean very well explains is actually making a link to the old world. So we prefer to just have people buy in directly, as we did with DroneShare. But we just found people are not familiar with it yet, nor maybe know how it works or trust it. So they just say, "Can I just give you euros and you do it for me?" And so we really need a gateway with the old world, and hopefully sometime in the future that they can just directly buy into the smart contract.
Oh, what would the gateway look like?
Well, it's like, to scope out the problem of what the stablecoin is used for. So the problem is that, as we said, users have euros. And using the example that we had earlier, or if they don't have Ether to buy into these things, how are they going to, participate in an ICO? And we can't just lock out non-crypto owners from this infrastructure evolution. So we need to find a way to make sure that users can use euros to purchase these things. And additionally, the infrastructure provider, so the person who's raising this money for this new windmill or solar panel they want to build, they also need to receive euros or some stable value at the end of the crowdfund, because that's what they use to purchase the infrastructure with. Like, you can't buy, a windmill with DAI or with Tether. Not that we would want to use Tether, for example, but so that's where the gateways and the problem of stablecoin is really relevant, because the benefit of using this to the blockchain is that all the important economic activity is transparent, it's auditable, the system is accessible basically where there is internet, if we can want to set up that way. But then to accommodate the problem of, one, users need euros or want to spend euros, and the infrastructure provider needs to buy their infrastructure in euros, we need to attach gateways and use a stable coin while it's being run through the blockchain so that we can make sure it comes out as the same euro value.
So it comes out the same way it goes in, so that people can't really notice that you're actually using a blockchain, a stablecoin, a wallet, and a smart contract.
Right. Except it is important because in doing so, people can trade their ownership values without us necessarily. The actual dividend can be distributed automatically from a smart contract that takes a bulk amount and sends it directly to the token holders. The crowd fund can be viewed and people can trust that the people who put the ownership or the funds in will get the appropriate shares of ownership out. All that activity will be done automatically, programmatically, and
you want to do this with a stable value because if you do Ether or Bitcoin, in a good scenario they get more money out of it, but in a bad scenario the money is worth less. So
and that'd be pretty bad if the crowdfund finished and you can't buy your windmill because the price tanked 10% or something.
So that's actually the reason behind it.
I'm wondering if you guys can tell us about your vision of the future. So what does NestEgg look like with a lot more adoption? And what do you think the future of blockchain in this whole sort of industry looks like, say, 2 to 5 years from now?
I really believe we're moving towards a future which is way more automated. And in the sense that I'm kind of not worried, but I think that we will see people losing their jobs faster than we can actually provide an alternative. And there's alternatives being proposed, like universal basic income and the sharing economy. It sounds cool, and there are attempts like Uber and Airbnb, but they're not actually sharing. If you think that they're just in the middle, taking the value and start taking more. And I think it's a combination of those two which we need to pursue in order to make the future as we want it. Because otherwise, I don't know what the world is looking like if people lose their jobs and there's no alternative. So I think if you combine those efforts, then you could make not universal basic income, but universal basic services. And that's kind of why I'm pursuing the NestEgg goal together with this cool team. Because I think that is a solution in which people can, during the time they still have their jobs, invest in this infrastructure and get the services accordingly.
So what's preventing people from, say, like buying up all the windmills? Like one rich guy buys all of it. Do you guys have sort of mechanisms in place so that you prevent that hyper-centralization of ownership?
Well, it's really funny you brought that up. A lot of people brought that up, and I think it's a good question, and it brings up the point of what happens if it just ends up being the same as it was. But I think the difference is that in doing so, even if that's the case, one, I don't think that's going to happen because like Uber's trying to produce all the cars for all transport, right? And like their deployment is huge, but doesn't even scratch the surface in terms of what they need to accomplish. And same for any rich person, they could not physically buy all the windmills necessary for all the communities. So I think at best, if someone does want to make a huge impact and start buying all these things, it would end up just creating a lot of innovative infrastructure, and the access to these infrastructures are then, much more accessible because you do it in a way where the actual dividend is tokenized, it's recorded, it's easily tradable, so that you can actually find the right owner at the right time to purchase it, even if they don't have the original ownership token. The ownership token is just how you get the dividend initially, but then after that, you have the choice of, do you want to use this dividend like a kilowatt hour to power your home, or do you want to sell it in the open market so someone else can power their home with a kilowatt hour? So in setting it up with this kind of framework, even if one person buys up a bunch of infrastructure and gets all this kind of credit, like they can't power their home with all those windmills. They have way too much energy. So they're going to be selling it back onto other people. And in doing so, you're going to create market dynamics that hopefully bring the commodity down to a zero marginal cost.
So I wonder what would happen if, say, it's not economical to have energy coming in from communities at a larger distance, and one guy in one community buys up all the windmills. What does that situation look like to you?
Well, then also that community has a bunch of windmills, right? I mean, like then that community now has like a bunch of windmills that were funded up front. That's my argument, but also.
No, I think, because this is a good point, and that brings up a problem. I think it's a bit trial and error in the sense that we should see if this actually happens. And if this actually happens, you could foresee and saying a person can only buy an X amount of share of a windmill, and that's just the max because we want to keep it as decentralized as possible.
That's cool.
I see these arguments as well. I just really wonder how it plays out, and we will have to see how we respond to that.
I'm really seeing how critical it is to have the identity component for any startup in this space if you want to limit hypercentralization. Because if you have the identity component and you want to limit it to like a percentage of ownership, then you need to ensure that it's not one guy who's owning like 30 different wallets and sending in and still monopolizing.
True. And those are things we can address. But then hopefully if it's being done transparently, we can attack every single vector of centralization. If we see all these flows of money going to a single wallet and stuff, you can have an open conversation about that. At least beforehand, that wasn't possible.
Yeah. Final question. What kind of questions do you wish more people would ask you when they're asking about your ideas about blockchain or about NestEgg? Like, what are questions you don't get that you wish you would get more?
Yeah, well, maybe not necessarily questions that people ask, but I'd like to hear what they see in it and how they see their role in this future. Because getting customer feedback is key, because we can build this future, but it's us together doing it. So we really need customers to think like that. So maybe not them asking us a question, but really them saying what they need in their community or what they need in their daily life. So we can better account for that in our product.
So, and then also to add on to that, in doing so, the biggest things we scoped out, for example, in NestEgg is energy and transport. But there's obviously tons of other infrastructure that is really relevant for, building out this future industrial revolution, where the third industrial revolution, where everything is shared and accessible and uses IoT to make sure it's in the right place at the right time and you can pay what you want. It's not just cards, it's not just energy. So it'd be interesting to see what other infrastructures people think are relevant to this vision, and and see what types of things they would like to see become created.
All right, guys. So how can people get a hold of you and find you online?
NestEgg.eu.
So not the NestEgg as in the American one, but NestEgg with the EGG.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot for joining us on the show. It was really nice having you. It's nice hearing your perspective about the future and what you guys are doing with NestEgg. It's really inspiring. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for reaching out to us. We appreciate it.
Okay, this was our interview with Dean and Nathalie of NestEgg. To get the show notes, go to cryptoradio.io/NestEgg. Also, make sure to check out other interviews in the Thought Leader series at cryptoradio.io/thought-leaders.
If you're new to the show and you'd like a list of our top episodes and resources, go to cryptoradio.io/start. If you like our podcast, you can subscribe, share, and follow us on social media and leave us a rating and review on iTunes and elsewhere. It helps others find the show, and we really appreciate it. You can find all those links at cryptoradio.io/start. And finally, if you want to be a sponsor of our show, go to cryptoradio.io/sponsor. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.